tired of hearing my voice now. I know I am.
Never.
I love you too. Sis! Yeah. No, I won't carry that on. But, has everyone had a good time?
Yeah.
That's the most feedback I've got over 2 days. I should normally open at the end. That works well. So we've saved the best for last. Our next speaker is world-renowned. You might have seen her on BBC Breakfast. You're the hackers, you're asleep at that time, isn't it? 5 AM and so. Or maybe you've heard her on radio and recognise her distinctive Geordie accent, even though I believe she now lives in Liverpool and works in London. So it's a really messed up accent. Yeah, we've had a great time here. Well, I've had a great time here. I think the quality of the talks have been absolutely outstanding, and I think it was long overdue that we had a conference up north of London. For me, I live in London, everything's up north. Outside the M25, everything's up north. I don't care. But we've got a big proper BSides here, and I think you've all been fantastic. And I hope you really do enjoy the closing keynote. We've got Dr. Jessica Barker here, who is one of the few females who speak on the circuit. And I know women in security are here, and we always talk about, getting more equality and stuff. So, yeah, I had a point that I was going to make. I've completely forgotten it.
You're doing well, dude.
I'm doing well, aren't I? Yeah, I should have notes. Yeah, I should have notes. That's one of the reasons I didn't do a talk. I hate submitting talks because I always forget what I'm talking about. I submit one talk and the title's something, the abstract's something else, and then when I get up there I talk about something completely different. So, but no one really catches on, so it just proves I was really paying attention. But anyway, with that, thank you very much. It's been really great seeing you all here. After this, we're going to have a closing, and then I assume a lot of people are going to shoot off, but great seeing you, and I'll hand you over to the very capable hands of Dr. Barker.
Thank you, David. Hello everyone, so yes, I am Jess. I am an independent cybersecurity consultant, and today I'm talking about fear and loathing in cybersecurity. Unfortunately, I'm not just playing the film. And I'm also, as you'll see, not in costume. I thought about the hat and the glasses and the mescaline, but I decided to give that a miss today. What I'm talking about is about kind of general awareness raising in cybersecurity, and that's one thing that I do as an independent consultant. So I work with organisations, and often it is kind of the general awareness raising, starting at the board level and talking to them about the threat and what they can do. And having done that for the last kind of 4 or 5 years, I find myself thinking a lot kind of about the threat and the extent to which we use it in the right or the wrong way to engage with awareness. As well as working with organisations, as Javed said, I do a little bit of media work, and so kind of think quite a bit about the general public and communicating the message to, you're always told when a BBC producer rings or whatever, they want you to be kind of pitching to your mum and dad or your grandparents. So kind of thinking, and they will always say kind of the lowest common denominator. So I've kind of done some news stuff, but I also do some work with Rip Off Britain. Does anybody watch Rip Off Britain? Anybody familiar with the lovely Gloria Hannaford? Yes. Honestly, you've not lived until you've worked with Angela Rippon and Gloria Hannaford, but that's a story for another day. But working with Rip Off Britain, it's a daytime TV programme. It's about kind of consumer awareness raising, so they look at all sorts of consumer issues, and they're finding increasingly that people are worried and scared of the internet and doing things online. So I worked with them a bit this summer, and I worked with them a lot last summer. And what it involves is often engaging with kind of real life problems of the general public. So last summer, one thing I did was a pop-up shop that was like filmed. and people came in and talked about their worries, or they came to you with a problem. And what I found that loads of people were coming to me and saying, I'm scared, I've been hacked, I'm scared of emails, I'm scared to use the internet. And I was like, well, why are you scared? And I just am, because I've been told to be. I don't know what I'm scared of. So people don't know what they're scared about, but they're scared. And this is why I've been sort of increasingly trying to think about fear. So I've told you a little bit about who I am. I'll tell you a bit more. This might be a tad extreme, but I chose this quote, obviously partly because it was a line by Hunter S. Thompson, who is an awesome author, and Fear and Loathing was the vague inspiration for this talk. But also, I've had quite an unusual route into this industry. So I'm a sociologist, really, is how I would classify myself. My undergraduate degree was in sociology and politics, and I originally wanted to be a politician, and then I worked with politicians. So then I went on to do some work in regeneration, and I worked for the now defunct Northwest Development Agency, and I worked mainly on social inclusion. So it was a research role, and I was looking at the idea of kind of deprivation and poverty and social inclusion. I went on from there to look at kind of regeneration in a different sense, and the idea of like clusters and networked information, and the role of networked information in regeneration. That led on to my PhD. I did a master's and PhD. My master's was in town and regional planning, and then my PhD was in civic design. Civic design is kind of the design of society, sort of what it says on the tin. So that's like a combination of sociology and town planning. And what I was looking at was globalization, the internet, the idea of networked information, and kind of how that has changed, obviously, over the last couple of decades, and particularly what impact that's had on how we regenerate and on our cities, and on institutions, and on individuals. So I did that. Somebody's phone's ringing. Shall I point it? I'm teasing. I had to remind myself to turn mine off. That would have been really embarrassing. I'm now wondering if I actually did turn it off. There's been so many technical issues with me today. I won't go into those now. So I did my PhD, and that was, as I said, sort of in civic design, and the methodology was qualitative. So loads and loads of interviews with loads of different people. I was really lucky that I could go to different cities as part of my research. Spent the time in America. And sort of got to the end of my PhD and was a bit sick of the subject, and was very sick of academia, where you are one person talking to two people, you write a thesis and three people read it because they have to, because they are examining you on it. So I felt like I wanted a new challenge, wanted to do something different, and I was very lucky that I was approached by somebody kind of 6 degrees of separation. They heard about my research. They were setting up a cybersecurity consultancy, and they wanted someone who could bring a different perspective. They sort of had a lot of technical skills. They wanted someone with a more social and human and business focus. So hiya, that ended up being me. So very lucky. I was trained and worked there for a few years, and then about 15 months ago set up on my own, and now work as an independent consultant. So that's who I am. And so I wanted to talk about that because it's an unusual routine, and we've talked a little bit about that over the weekend, and kind of the importance of kind of accepting and being inclusive to people with different routes in. I also wanted to say it because it explains why I had such trouble getting my soon-to-be-shown videos played today, because I am not technical. And talking of fear and loathing, I have had a lot of fear about this presentation and everything, and I think the organisers now loathe me because they've literally spent hours trying to get this sorted for me. But anyway, what am I talking about today? I'm talking about what is fear, so how do we understand fear, and how has that changed sort of over the last few decades. I'm talking about something called fear repeals, and that brings in the extended parallel process model. As I said to Javid, there's a reason I have got notes today, and that is because I'm looking at a lot of psychological theories, and they all have very long words, which I can't store in my head. And a theme that will come up a lot today is efficacy, and that is basically how you get an intended outcome, so how you get people to do things, and kind of crosses into empowerment. Fear control responses, so how do we respond to fear? The idea of planned behaviour. So planned behaviour is all about intentions and actions and translating the two. A little bit of a look at climate change, a very big problem which we need everybody to act on and people are kind of in denial about. Empowerment, which again has come up a little bit over the last couple of days and I think is sort of really important in this field, and I'll end with some recommendations. But why am I talking about all of this? Well, one thing that I think we're all aware of is that human behaviour in this space is not changing fast enough. We all know that users aren't changing their passwords, they aren't using secure passwords, they are clicking on phishing links even when they suspect they're phishing links. 30% of people, I read recently, 30% of people, even if they know they received an email with a phishing link in, they will still click on it, just out of curiosity, so that's weird. I also am a sociologist, so I love theory. So that's why I've decided to present you a bunch of academic theories to end the weekend. But also I think theory is important, because when we're talking about changing behaviour in this space, we can't just think about the technical, we can't just think about the practical, we have to think about the context. And that's what theories give us. They stimulate, they allow us to predict, they allow us to create, and really they allow us to think about the bigger picture and the context. So that's why I'm talking about it. But to begin with, I'm going to show you a video. This may or may not.
Step off of this fantastic machine! It's 993! Your bodies will appear 200 feet tall on a swing over downtown Las Vegas. Here's 9964. You can have a voice message. Say whatever you want, fella. Oh, now here you go. You'll be 200 feet tall!
The ether was wearing off. The acid was long gone. But the mescaline was running strong. Good mescaline comes on slow. First hour's all waiting. Then about halfway through its second hour, you start cursing the creep who burned you because nothing's happened. And then, zang.
I hate to say this, but this place is getting to me. I think I'm getting the fear.
Nonsense. We came here to find the American dream. Now that we're right in the vortex, she want to quit. You must realize, man, we found the main nerve.
That's what gives me the fear.
So I couldn't do a talk that referenced Fear and Loathing without showing you a clip of Fear and Loathing. And I figured if my slides weren't enough to give you a migraine, then a nice big clip might be. So he's getting the fear, but what is the fear? Fear primarily has been studied by psychology because it's always been seen as an emotion. So we feel a physical response to fear, and kind of we've always understood it as this sort of Darwinian fight or flight. So we've evolved to recognise threats and to react with a physical response where we either fight, we either try and engage and fight off the fear, or we run away. And so it's been studied mainly by psychology, but over the last sort of 10 or 15 years, sociology has turned its attention to it a bit more. So this guy Tudor was one of the first sociologists to really look at fear. And what he talks about is how it's embedded in different kind of contexts. So it is cultural, it's social, it will vary according to the context that you're in, and I just sort of wonder also, is it now technical? And that's obviously kind of what I'm talking about today. An example Tudor gives that's sort of quite interesting is about a tiger. So he says if you are walking through the jungle, or through the streets of Manchester, he doesn't say streets of Manchester, if you're walking through the streets of Manchester and you come across a tiger, you will only be scared of it if you have a cognitive map to recognise what a tiger is. If you don't know what a tiger is and you don't know the fear that it represents, then you might just think it's this big fluffy thing that you can go up and cuddle. So you need to understand what it is and the threat it represents to translate that into fear. So that means it's social. Somebody needs to have told you, you need to be educated in it. I think you see where I'm getting at in terms of the subject. If you haven't got that cognitive map, then you can't balance your curiosity with the danger. But then Tudor goes on to point out, even if you understand what it is, how you respond to it will vary depending on your role. So if you are just a person and you come across a tiger and you know what a tiger is, you're going to be scared. But if you are a hunter and you're there to kill this lovely animal, and you are equipped with all of the equipment you need to kill it, and the skills and the training, then you might feel the physical response of fear, so you might feel the adrenaline, but you'll channel that into killing the tiger. And you will also feel excited that you're going to make loads of money from killing this lovely thing. So a hunter is going to feel different to just a person on the street. A guide, change slide. So a guide, you can see, I think the guy on the top, I've decided he's a guide, the rest are his hunter friends. But if you're a guide and you come across a tiger, you're there with people who want to see tigers. You are protected by other people who have the knives and the guns, just in case the tiger gets out of control. So you have been trained. You have skills and knowledge. You're in a group where there's a division of labour and there's a hierarchy. And you're with people who want to see this tiger. So you're educating them in it. So you're explaining what the tiger is, you're explaining the threat, you're explaining how you manage that. So you don't feel the same fear. So when I read through that, I decided we are the guides. So we're this guy. I wish we were this guy with the facial hair, but I don't think we are. I think we're this guy that he doesn't necessarily have any weapons, but he's surrounded by people with weapons, and he is facilitating this kind of knowledge and understanding. So that's what I think fear is. It's kind of a mixture of psychological and social. So I mentioned before the idea of fear appeals. So does anybody know what fear appeals are? Nope. So fear appeals are, you will all have seen them, they are persuasive messages to arouse fear. So basically, smoking is bad, and why smoking is bad, so when you see the horrible lungs and things. So there's fear appeals on every packet of cigarettes that is sold now. Public health messages often are fear appeals. Kind of drunk driving, drive safe, use your seatbelt, all of these often rely on fear appeals. So Witt and Allen are some psychologists, and they looked at fear appeals. Fear appeals have been around for a good sort of 50 or 60 years. Witt and Allen looked at over 100 psychological articles that were all addressing the idea of fear appeals, going back to 1953. And they looked at three concepts. They looked at fear, they looked at perceived threat, and perceived efficacy. So efficacy, I mentioned earlier, it will keep coming up in the talk today. Efficacy is about producing the desired outcome. So it's about getting what you want and being motivated to get that. And efficacy has two sides. There's response efficacy and there's personal efficacy. So if you're trying to get someone to do something, you have to show them that what you're trying to get them to do is a good thing and will work. And you also have to show them that they can do it. So it's the wider thing and it's the personal thing. But what they found overall is that as fear appeals increase in strength, so does resistance and denial. So the more we scare people, the more they will bury their head in the sand. So when you're using fear appeals, you need to use them with caution. Now, a psychologist who I really like, called Loathing, he looked at fear appeals, but he kind of extended the analysis of it. And he came up with this thing called, and this is why I have the nose, Extended Parallel Process Model. I don't know why it's called that, but EPPM. And he said that basically to get people to engage with a fear appeal, there's a few stages. So firstly, when we look at a fear appeal, or when we sort of see one, when we're confronted with one, we will appraise it sort of subconsciously in a couple of ways, and that will lead to a couple of possible outcomes. So firstly, we will appraise the fear appeal in terms of severity, so how bad does it seem? And then also we will look at it in terms of susceptibility, so how likely am I to be susceptible to it? The more severe it seems and the more susceptible we are, or we feel we are, that will lead us to look at the efficacy. So if we don't convince people that it is that what we're scaring them with is bad, and that it's likely to happen to them, they'll just shut off and they won't carry on. But if we can convince them that it is a severe threat and that they are likely to be susceptible to it, then they will appraise how to respond to it. And then how they perceive the efficacy leads to them to consider whether to control the danger or control the fear. So if they think that the response being suggested is rubbish, is not going to work, or if they think that they don't have the skills and the knowledge to engage with that response and deliver that response, then they will just control the fear. So they'll go into denial. But if they are convinced that the response is a good thing and will have a positive outcome, and if they're convinced that they actually can enact it, then they'll control the danger. So I think about this sort of in terms of if you're selling information security, or if you're kind of talking to a board about why they should improve their information security, you have to convince them that the threat is real, that the threat applies to them, that the response being sold or offered to them actually is going to solve the problem, and that they have the power, they have the knowledge, they have the skills to enact that response. So Loathing, who I mentioned, came up with this theory. He then tested it out. So one thing he was looking at, it was the early 1970s, and tetanus was a big problem. Lots of people were getting tetanus. There was an inoculation about, but people weren't taking it up. People weren't going for the injection. So he got a bunch of students in to try to scare them into getting the inoculation. So to begin with, he showed them really horrible pictures of people experiencing tetanus convulsions, with lesions, with all of the horrible things that come from tetanus. And he was really pleased. The students were really scared. They went away saying, yeah, tetanus is a bad thing and I should get that injection. But then they didn't go and get the injection. They just went off to the pub and they soon forgot about it and stopped being scared. So he got them back in. He showed them the pictures. They got scared. He then gave them a map of their campus that said, this is where your lecture theatres are, this is where the library is, and this is where the health centre is. And these are the times that it's open, when you can go and get the injection. And it increased from, I think it was just under 4% of students that got the injection the first time when they were just scared, to over 30% who, they had a map, they already knew where the health centre was, they already knew what times it was open, but they were handed a map, and suddenly it jumped from about 4% to over 30% of people actually going and getting the injection. So you can see he made them feel that the threat was severe, he made them feel that they were likely to get it, that they were susceptible, and then he enabled their efficacy. So he made them feel like they could control the danger rather than just controlling the fear. So fear control responses. So fear control responses, you feel paranoid, you feel scared, you feel like you've just got to get out, you've got to run away. And that's basically what a fear control response is. It's a psychological defense tactic. So in terms of EPPM, it's all that thing about controlling the fear rather than controlling the danger. The more scared you are, the more likely you are to put your head in the sand. So the stronger, as I said before, the stronger the fear message, the fear repeal, the more likely you are to go into denial. Now, is anyone a fan of Parks and Recreation? I know that some people in the room will be. I know that some are, because someone's got a cat called Swanson. So, and the people that are laughing at Swanson obviously know who he is. So that answers that question.
Hey, bro! Listen, I was trying to buy this handcrafted mahogany wood model of B-25 Mitchell Panchito aircraft.
Aw, for me?
Don't sass me. And I went to this website, and this ad popped up that said, hey, Ron Swanson, check out this great offer.
What's your question?
My question is, what the hell?
Like, how do they know who you are?
Yeah.
Okay, there are these things called cookies, where, like, if you go to a site and buy something, it'll remember you and then create ads for other stuff you might want to buy.
So it learns information about me? Seems like an invasion of privacy.
Dude, if you think that's bad, go to Google Earth and type in your address.
Obviously you should. And that's a fear. I'm just going to leave you with the lovely Leslie note for a minute while I talk about this. And that's a fear repeal. That's what happens. So April gives Ron a fear repeal. This is Google Earth. And what does he do? He just goes into denial and he throws his computer in the bin, which is obviously the worst thing that he can do, because Do we think that he securely destroyed his data before he did that? No, we do not. So, for those of you who don't watch, Parks and Recreation, or for those of you that do, who is Ron Swanson? Anybody? I know some of you watch it. So someone tell me something about Ron Swanson. No one's going to help me out here. He loves breakfast food. He loves bacon. Yeah, exactly. He doesn't like cookies. He does not like, he works for the government, but he hates the government. He stores all of his wealth in gold. He loves chopping wood. So basically, the short answer is he is a hero of our times, and you either want to be him or you want to marry him. But he is also skeptical. He's not a particularly anxious person, but he's skeptical and he's cynical. So why am I telling you this? Obviously I'm telling you this because I love Parks and Recreation and Ron Swanson, so I shoehorn that clip into every talk that I do. But also I'm telling you this because psychologists look at the extent to which individual traits impact on how we respond to fear. And in terms of your level of anxiety, a fear appeal makes no difference. So whether you are an incredibly anxious person by nature, or whether you are not anxious at all, it makes no difference to how you respond to a fear appeal. Where it does make a difference is in terms of efficacy. So efficacy is kind of where your individual beliefs matter, and the extent to which you think you're skilled and knowledgeable and trained is the extent to which you will engage in changing your behaviour. So moving on to another theory now. The theory of planned behaviour. So what is this? Theory of planned behaviour is quite straightforward. It basically says that human beings are governed by their personal attributes, social norms, and their sense of control or efficacy. So by social norms, what we mean is kind of how they see people around them acting and behaving, and then they will kind of follow suit. People will pay particular attention to significant individuals, so people who they think are important or relevant, and the extent to which they condemn or condone an act. So the relevance of individuals matter. The extent to which they are seen as important or knowledgeable will have an impact on the extent to which I decide to follow the social norms, but it also varies according to context. So what my boss says about work things matters more to me than what my mum says about work things, but what my mum says about what clothes I should wear matters more to me than... Anyway, what my mum thinks about family life matters more to me than what my boss thinks about family life. So it varies according to context. And basically what the theory of planned behaviour is about is how to turn intentions into actions. So how to make people go from thinking something is good to actually doing that thing that they think is good. So, the theory of planned behaviour, so I've sort of covered that a little bit. Perceived behavioural controls. So perceived behavioural controls, they turn intentions into actions. And it's the extent to which individuals feel that they can actually engage in a behaviour. And this will be internal, as I've said, the extent to which they think they're skillful, knowledgeable, they're equipped to engage in this behaviour, but also external. So they will be thinking about time, be thinking about stress, be thinking about colleagues, be thinking about money. And this can have a divergence. So people can say, I want to be more secure online, but then they can engage in behaviours that are not at all secure, because they don't understand what the right behaviours are. And in terms of planned behaviour, there is sort of ideas around classes of social norms. So I talked about social norms and kind of how they are, how other people are acting, and the extent to which we might follow suit. And there's two different types. There's descriptive, which purely describe how you should be behaving, how other people are behaving, and then there's injunctive. And injunctive are symbols. And so it is kind of a tick or a cross or a smiley face, and they don't have the same effect. So descriptive norms, when people are told everybody uses their mother's maiden name as their password, if you know there's a press article or someone on the news telling them that, then people will take on that behaviour. So if somebody goes on the TV and says, vast majority of people are just using their mother's maiden name as their password. Then for the people that are using their own surname as a password, they will improve slightly and they'll use their mother's maiden name. But for everyone else, they will go, amazing, I don't need to use all these complicated passwords because no one else is, I'm just going to use my mother's maiden name. So descriptive norms can be helpful, but they're often not, because they kind of just make everyone average out. So the people who are doing really, really badly will get a little bit better, but the people who are above the line will just lower their behaviour. But injunctive norms can cancel that out. So people really like pictures. So some research by, I can't say all of these names, but Schultz et al. They looked at energy consumption. And what they were doing was looking at energy consumption in neighbourhoods and trying to get people to use less energy. So they measured energy consumption and then they sent communications round saying you are using more energy than your neighbours, you are using less energy than your neighbours. When they just sent that round, they found, of course, that the people who were using more energy brought it down a little bit, but the people who were using less brought it up. Amazing. But when they put a smiley face for the people who were using less energy, those people kept it down because they wanted to keep getting their smiley faces. And it worked. They did it as a longitudinal study and the people kept their energy consumption down over a couple of months. The people who got the sad faces, they, of course, improved their behaviour because they heard about Bob next door, who was getting a smiley face, and they wanted a smiley face. So, amazingly simple and weird, but I sort of think we can use this again. And I wonder, you know, when you put your password in, you create a new password on the website and it gives you the strength indicator, and you see it go from stronger to weaker. And that is kind of an injunctive norm. But I sort of think if we can maybe start just appealing to the child a little bit more, the child or the raver, I don't know, but with the smiley faces and the sad faces, apparently that makes a big difference. Another thing, in terms of perceived behavioural response, intentions expressed more than once and written down are more likely to lead to a change in behaviour. So I think about this a lot when I am designing sort of training packages for organisations, because I know if I go in and I deliver the training once and I get everybody to say yes, yes, I'm going to get much better, that when I go away they will quickly forget about it. So you kind of have to keep going back and keep getting them to express those same intentions over and over again. And only when they kind of keep doing it and keep writing it down and keep planning it out, will they actually change their behaviour. So, I talked a little bit there about energy consumption. And I think climate change is quite an interesting comparison to information security, because we kind of face a similar problem. So when I'm talking here, it's based on some research by the American Psychology Association, a big report they did a few years ago on climate change. And they found that 75% of the US and the UK population think that climate change is a big issue and that we should all do something about it. But only a few people actually do anything about it. So anybody working in climate change faces a similar problem to us in that they just can't get people, no matter how much they scare them, they can't get people to change their behaviours. And this American Psychology Association report kind of identified the key barriers. And I think we will all recognise these as key barriers in changing behaviour and information security. So uncertainty, the extent to which people think it actually is a big problem, or is it not? Can I convince myself that it's not? And also uncertainty of advice. So kind of going back to Heartbleed, and people got very confused about, you know, when they should be changing their passwords and should they be, and what should they be doing. And I had lots of people getting in touch with me saying, we don't understand this, and we don't know what we should be doing, so we're not going to do anything, right? And I think, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about Glassner. So there's a sociologist called Glassner who talked a lot about culture of fear. And he had a book out about 10 years ago called Culture of Fear, and basically says that we are living in a time where we're all just really, really scared, and blames it on the media. And he kind of says the media kind of whips up all of this fear, but they don't really underpin it with much facts or how to actually change behaviour. And I do some work with the media, and I always try and kind of think about this when I do, because I don't want to be one of these people that is just kind of whipping up the fear without actually explaining what it means and what people can do about it. So I would say that's why it actually matters and why we should all be engaging more in media to try and make this a subject that is actually broken down for people to understand. Mistrust. So mistrust is a big problem for climate change. People don't really believe what the government is telling them. They don't really believe authority. And I sort of wonder about Snowden and NSA and GCHQ and the extent to which people maybe have a mistrust around how information is used and around information security, and if that is a bit of a barrier in terms of kind of denial. Social comparison, I've already kind of talked about in terms of norms and social norms and kind of the perception of what is proper behaviour. People will look around them and look at what other people are doing. So in terms of social comparison, that's where I think injunctive rather than descriptive norms matter, so the smiley face rather than you are very bad. Undervaluing risks. So this is kind of a similar thing to uncertainty. But basically, in undervaluing risks, what this report on climate change found is that when people were told climate change is going to be a really big problem in 25 years, what that translated to in people's heads was, yes, 25 years. And I sort of think that's a similar problem here, that people undervalue risks, and people think until it's happened to them, it's not going to happen to them, and only if I get hacked will I worry about it. Lack of control, so again this ties into efficacy, so the extent to which people think they actually can change their behaviour, they actually have the knowledge to, and they actually think that it will matter. Perceived behavioural control, I've talked about a lot, but this is kind of a collective action problem. So kind of getting people to believe that they as individuals matter and that their behaviours count and can change, and habit. People don't like changing their habits. It takes a long time to change people's habits. And I think we sort of have a similar problem in information security. People aren't used to having a number of different passwords. They don't know how to manage passwords. They don't know how to engage. They're used to clicking on links and being able to go wherever they want on the internet. And they don't really like suddenly having to think about the risks with that. This report found a few things in terms of what we can do to improve behaviour. One ties in a bit, I think, to the smiley faces, and that is the power of immediate feedback. So when you've got a big problem that is kind of delayed and where you don't often see it, or you don't see it until after the event, then immediate feedback is a really important thing. And they quote a psychologist called Lurtzman, I think I pronounced that right, who talks about paralysis due to the size of a problem. So the bigger a problem is, the more people will be scared and paralysed and go into denial. And one thing Lurtzman talks about is victim blaming. And she says that in terms of climate change, we are kind of blaming individuals a lot, and people don't like to be blamed, they like to be empowered. And so by blaming individuals, we're just making them feel bad, and we're making them feel stupid, and we're not changing behaviour. And it's something I'm talking at SteelCon in a couple of weeks, and I'm talking a little bit about victim blaming, because I know I sometimes do it, but I think we all sort of do it a bit in this industry. We will point at the user and say, haha, you're really stupid, you're not doing what you should be, and that's why you got hacked. And people are very aware of that. And what Lurtzman says is that if it was health rather than climate change, or rather than information security, then people kind of look at empowerment a lot more. So if someone contracts an illness, doctors and sort of medical researchers will not point the finger and kind of say, haha, you're stupid, it's your fault, because that's not very nice. So, moving on from victim blaming to empowerment. C talked about empowerment very briefly earlier. Empowerment, I think, is a stupid word for something that is really important. Empowerment is something that has been looked at in psychology in terms of community psychology. So looked at as like a collective thing in a community. And as I've got a quote there by Rappaport, I just like saying that name. Empowerment is a process by which people, organisations and communities gain mastery over their affairs. And I think that's a really important quote in terms of information security, because isn't that what we want? So empowerment varies according to context. Empowerment is about being inclusive rather than blaming individuals. And it is about, in terms of community psychology, they looked at it a lot in terms of health and in terms of mental health. And Rappaport talks a lot about how you can combine prevention with empowerment. Because of course we can't talk about information security without pointing out the things that people shouldn't be doing. And it sounds like that is fundamentally opposed to empowerment. So how can you tell people not to do loads of things at the same time as telling them, but you can do it? So it's quite a tricky thing to balance. And empowerment in community psychology grew out the idea of competence building. And competence building, I think, is something we come across a lot in information security, but it's very individual focused, whereas empowerment is about the kind of bigger picture. And a sociologist called Zimmerman, some really amazing names here, but Zimmerman talks about empowerment and kind of says that it is positive, that the more you're in a leadership role, the more you're engaged, and the more responsibility you have, the more empowered you are. So Zimmerman looked at a mental health support group and found that people that were just attending did not feel at all empowered, and it was a lot harder for them to change their behaviours. But people who were offering some level of support were a little bit more likely to change their behaviours. People who had a formal role were more likely to change their behaviours than people that were just offering some support. And the people who were leading were the most empowered. So when I am delivering training, delivering awareness raising, one thing I always try and get the organisation to do at the same time, if they haven't already, is to put in a governance structure and to think about kind of how they are governing information in the organisation and the different roles that everybody will have. Because everybody likes to have a role, everybody likes to know what they're supposed to be doing, and when they have a role, they are more likely to act in the way that you're telling them to. Spectrum of empowerment. So, recommendations. So in terms of recommendations, I've talked a lot about different theories, but I just wanted to spend just a couple of minutes pulling out what I think are the most important facts, because I realise I've talked a lot of theory. So empower as well as prevent, make people feel that they can engage with this and be inclusive. Communication matters. So in terms of communication, there's a few things, and they kind of came out of each different bit of research that I've talked about. So vivid language and consequences are really important in getting people to change their behaviour. Being visual, so showing people pictures, like going back to Loathing and the pictures of people with the convulsions and with the lesions. People really like pictures, so the more visual you can be in communication, the better. Being personal, so instead of saying there is a huge danger out there, you face a huge danger. So just translating that into how it impacts on the individual, and not passive. So I often wonder about the term user, because it's a very kind of passive term. It's not empowering. It's like you're using this thing and you have no control. So I don't know what a better word is, but I'm not sure about user. Immediate feedback. So going back to that thing about symbols and kind of making things really simple and making people feel like that what they're doing actually matters. Making a threat seem serious and likely, so severe, and that they are susceptible to it. I think the most important thing is that strong fear has to be backed up with strong efficacy. So, and that is of course in terms of response efficacy, so our solutions will actually make a difference. And also personal efficacy, so you actually can do it. You are knowledgeable enough, we're going to give you this training and we're going to make you understand what you need to do and give you that cognitive map, or that map of campus that Loathing had. And finally, assess and evaluate. So getting feedback, especially if you are using fear as a kind of a way to change behaviour, you can't do that and not evaluate it, because you don't know if all you're doing is getting people to bury their head in the sand. So, thank you very much for your time today. Thank you very much for Manchester BSides for asking me to speak. Thank you very much for lasting until the end. If anybody has any questions, I would love to hear them. There's my contact details, so please get in touch, find me on Twitter. And thank you very much for all of the technical help that allowed me to show you the wonder that is Swanson.
question.
Okay.
So, as a species, we've evolved a certain set of skills for assessing risk in a physical sense. So, we won't take risks in gathering food, which, where I might die or break a leg or something like that. But when it comes to technology, we're not very good at assessing risk. So, how do we address the dichotomy of the user underestimating the risk, and as the information security professional, overestimating the risk?
Okay, good question. So I think it's one thing kind of communicating the risk, and I think we kind of do that quite well. I think you're right, we need to make sure we don't overestimate it, because as soon as we overestimate it, then we put people off and they get it in the sand. But I think and we're going back to kind of thing of efficacy, so it's not just communicating the risk, but it's what you can do about it. And I think we're getting quite good at communicating the risk, but we're not telling people enough about what they can do and how they can do it, and kind of why they should do it. So I sort of think and the two have to be done hand in hand. But I also think we forget that this is quite a new industry, really. The internet hasn't been around for all that long, and people are still learning, and it's moving really, really fast. So it's quite hard to kind of balance that pace with any sort of deep change and changing kind of culture and behaviour. I don't think that answers your question particularly well, but...
Any other questions?
Yeah. We talk a lot about fear, and in terms of the carrot and stick, we have a lot of stick and not a lot of carrot.
Yeah.
Is there any way that we can make this into a more positive thing for users rather than having the carrot be the absence of the stick?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and it's something that again I sort of try and do with organisations. So kind of doing stuff like when I'm doing training, I do a lot of like quizzes, pop quizzes, and ask a lot of questions, and like throw out sweets and stuff. And that's dangerous because I did once hit a woman smack bang in the middle of her head with a chocolate eclair, not one with cream in, but one of the hard ones. So that was a bit of a stick that was meant to be a carrot, but so kind of little rewards in terms of that. So and that has two effects. So one thing when you're delivering training, or when you're trying to deliver any kind of knowledge, you have to test it, because if you don't test it, then people don't take it in as much. So A, that's testing it, but then B, that's sort of rewarding it. I will also give out like sweets for anybody that asks a question about anything, just to get people to kind of engage. And then on a sort of wider scale, I will put in place things in organisations like they will have like a monthly thing where somebody goes away and either prepares like a little one-page article on a certain topic, and then they do that and they get rewarded for that, or briefings, at team meetings. Again, I'll give them materials so they can do quizzes and get materials for that, or get rewards for that. And then also I've worked with organisations that give out certificates. So for when people engage in good behaviours, like when they stop someone tailgating or when they do whatever like that, then they'll be kind of pointed out as a change agent and get like a certificate and get acknowledged. But also in terms of the stick, psychology says quite a lot of stuff about that, about how to kind of punish people effectively. And if you're going to punish people effectively, you have to make them understand why they're being punished and have respect for who's punishing them. So if they don't think that the person punishing them is worthy of respect, and if they don't think what they're being punished for is something that is actually a bad thing, then it will not change their behaviours at all and can actually have the opposite effect and make them engage in even worse behaviours. So it kind of goes back to this thing of perceived behavioural response and efficacy, in that if people don't understand why they're doing something, and if they don't think that it actually is worthy of doing, then punishments are useless. Thank you.
the chocolate stuff definitely works. I got a kind of follow-on, which is sometimes we're in situations where I almost want to apologise to the people we're training, because the solution with current proposing is really a band-aid, because we're saying, don't click on things. We're kind of sorry that the user interface allows you to click on things in this situation. We really shouldn't be in a situation where you're actually presented with this information, but we're not smart enough to solve the problem. How do we kind of get that over?
That's a really tricky one, because what you're saying, if you're apologising for the solution, then you're saying the solution doesn't work, and so then they will not engage with the solution, and that's kind of the theme, again, of efficacy. So, yeah, we need better solutions, everybody, and that's, I don't think I can solve that. But also we have to stop apologising, and the problem is not our fault. The solutions that we have are better than nothing. And I think as long as we're proportionate in sort of educating with those solutions, as long as we don't expect people to be ridiculous and to have ridiculous levels of security, then I don't think we should apologise for it. And I think we should be more positive in general. I try to be really positive when I'm delivering training and awareness raising, because I think we can be a bit negative, and we can be a bit apologetic, and we can kind of feel a little bit bad. And then that's no good for us, and it's no good for our profession, but it's even worse for our users.
So, like, you talked about stuff that we can do to try and like make it more accessible, I guess. In reality, like, what effect does cost have on any kind of subject? So we're talking about like climate change and things like that. So, like, some people, I know you can get like wheelie bins and stuff, but like some people have to drive to bottle banks and things like that. So, like, in reality, like in general, like what does cost have?
Yeah, I think cost is a huge problem. And I know when I work with organisations delivering any kind of change in this space, if it's not well resourced and if it's not supported at the highest level, then people don't engage with it and it doesn't change behaviours. So you have to have the board level engaged, and you have to have the person holding the strings with the money. They have to be pushing it, because if they're not, then people don't have that trust in authority that I was talking about earlier that they need to actually change their behaviours. And if they don't think the big man or the woman at the top actually cares about it to throw some money at it, then they're not going to change their behaviours. So yeah, I think cost is a huge problem. But also when you're kind of trying to sell it, you have to convince the person you're selling to about response efficacy. So you have to convince them that what you're selling is actually going to work. So again, that ties into not being apologetic and having some confidence that what you're selling is at least kind of better than nothing. I'm not saying like sell snake oil, but if you believe in what you're selling and you believe that it's the right thing for that organisation, which you should do if you're selling it, then you can't be apologetic. You have to convince the person you're selling to that it is A, something that will work, and B, something that organisation can take on board. And then you get their engagement, and having them engaged does, I've seen it in organisations that have those engaged and that don't have the people at the top engaged, it has a huge effect in my opinion. Good question, thank you. Yeah.
I was just wondering how you could balance the fear and the efficacy together, because I'm just thinking, maybe for users or naive business owners, anything like that, that it's easier to pass over the understanding of fear and what you should be scared of. Yeah. But it's not a huge learning curve for them to understand the efficacy, how to balance that back out.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Is anyone recording this? Okay, so yeah, you're right. Let me just think that through for a second. So it's easy to talk about the fear, and it is harder, and the threat, and it's easy to scare people. It's harder, much harder, to get them engaged with what they can do and feeling like they can actually make a difference. And I think it's kind of a multifaceted solution to a multifaceted problem. But basically, I think you sort of have to start off with, I talked about like the governance. So you have to give people roles, make them feel empowered, and then give them that kind of cognitive map of all the things they can do. not overwhelm them, but I've found when you use the fear and you have to back it up immediately with the solutions and with making people understand what they can do, then I often find that people really take it on board and people kind of really run with it, especially if they've got a role, they really like that. And if it's supported at the top. So it's kind of all these different things have to come together. And then it is, as you say, I think it's building up. So you can't expect them to change their culture or their behaviours overnight, but you get them to change one or two and then you build it up and build it up. And if you kind of have people in the organisation with the roles doing that, then as I said earlier, it's kind of a rubbish phrase, but they become like the change agents and they become the ones where behaviours kind of bleed out from and other people see them and take them on board. What I've often found is that sometimes the people who are most resistant become the best change agents. So when I do training, there's often like one or two people in the group who are very resistant, and usually very resistant to the fear. They don't think it really exists. But once you've sort of turned them around, give them a role, and they will be the ones that will really take it on board. And if people see that Jane, who used to be very sceptical, you've turned her opinion around, you've changed some of her behaviours, and they'll think, wow, Jane used to think this was rubbish, and now Jane is better, so I'm going to... So it's that social norm thing. But also people who are kind of well respected and sort of important in an organisation, going back to the people with the money, changing their behaviours, then in terms of social norms, the more important someone is seen to be, the more relevant they're seen to be, the more everyone else will follow their behaviour. Thank you.
There's a gentleman over there who keeps putting his hands up and no one can see him in the corner.
Thank you.
So a few of us earlier were talking about passwords and how a lot of, some users don't want our help, especially when it comes to picking passwords. So, how would you go about help, in terms of educating users? If Facebook, gave users with a good password a badge, and everyone else didn't get a badge, or if they introduced, it's a terrible idea because it takes a massive card and everyone else, but for argument's sake, or they introduced a new feature that only kind of good.
Like that. When you put a password in, you get a nice green bar or a red bar.
Yeah, but
you still have crap password.
Yeah.
So I said that earlier, and I think you're right, the strength bar, but I think it does help, and I've heard people say that they do respond to that a bit. But as stupid as it sounds, what psychology says, like the smiley face, and I don't think I'd put a badge on for everyone else to see, but something that they themselves can see.
Or for example, if they introduce a new feature, only people with good passwords get access to this. But in broader terms, how would you say that we should, especially the empowerment thing, how should we go about educating users and encouraging them to pick and use better passwords and better practices?
If I could solve the password problem, I would be a millionaire right now. It's a nightmare. And when eBay had the problems a while ago, a month or whatever it was, I went on a few news programs and talked about it, and I wrote an article for Sunday Times about passwords, and it's a nightmare because it's a really difficult problem, because how are people supposed to remember? They have 1 million accounts, and they are supposed to have incredibly complicated passwords for each one, and you're not supposed to write them down, and so you're asking people to do something that's really difficult. There is no better solution. Bill Gates said like over 10 years ago that the password would soon be dead, and it still isn't, because there's no better solution, as we've talked about in a couple of talks today. So it's a huge problem. It's not easy to fix, but I think what I tried to do, particularly with the article, was explain why. So going back to the Leventhal thing and tetanus, so it's about not just kind of scaring people, but what underpins it. So getting people, I think we often don't join up the dots in this, so we often don't get people to really understand what the problem is. And all they hear is, you should do this thing that's really hard and really complicated, and it's going to take time and mental effort, and you're really busy and stressed about other stuff, so we're asking a lot of you. So kind of explaining the how and the why, and also giving them the simple advice of kind of what they need to do, so really laying it out for them. But passwords are a tricky thing, because it is just a bit of a nightmare. And the interviews I gave in particular around eBay and around, they all wanted to know about passwords. So I was on Radio 4 talking about it, and I was interviewed by Toby Blackburn, and they're all asking about passwords, and both of them end up saying, like, oh, right, it's a nightmare, isn't it? And I'm like, yeah, it is. What do you want me to say? I don't have the solution. But I think the more we can get people to understand that there are serious threats out there, that they do apply to them, you know, that they are going to get hacked, and why they shouldn't, why they don't want people accessing all of their accounts. Why having the same rubbish password for every account is a bad idea. If you can, because people, I think we often take for granted the level of knowledge, and we think people will just automatically get that having the same rubbish password for every account means that as soon as that password is accessed, then you've lost all your accounts. But if nobody's actually explained that to someone, they don't sit and think it through. They don't care about this stuff as much as we do. So kind of making sure you actually explain it, and then trying to help people come up with a system or a way of having better passwords.
Yeah, so like see with the tetanus example, there was a really good example a couple of years ago. Matt Bonin, who's a writer for Wired, his digital life basically got destroyed for his Twitter account. So you know, using a really public example like that, is that the sort of thing?
Yeah, and again, it's the social norms thing. So people that have respect for him, or people who think that he, you know, so kind of choosing people that people can relate to, so that will impact on, so if I think that he is cool and I aspire to be like him, then I am more likely to engage with that warning. So Rip Off Britain, I can't remember if it was Gloria Hanniford or Angela Rippon, but one of them got hacked. And so she is always talking about it because she knows that a certain demographic, she knows it sucks, she also knows a certain demographic will listen to her because they respect her. She's an influential figure to them. So the more we can get different people to engage with this subject and spread sort of the message about it, the better. And that's why, so when there was the RSA conference and Miss Teen USA went, she had her webcam hacked. And I was really disappointed to see this as a slight women insecurity issue as well. But on Twitter, people were going like crazy, sort of slagging her off for going and being like, what's this like beauty pageant girl doing, going to a security conference? And I think that is a really negative thing. Like, we should be encouraging more varied people to engage with this, and people who have relevant experience, because a bunch of teenage girls in America might suddenly be hiding their webcam because they have seen someone that they aspire to be like face that danger. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much.
We've got one more question in the far corner, and then we'll have to finish this. She's had a hand up for, I don't know, half an hour. Must be aching.
I wonder whether part of the problem, and part of this a very good example of this, is that sometimes, because the problem itself is complex, we like to think that the solution is complex, and that also maybe we're striving for perfection rather than a good solution. I don't think it's actually difficult to have a good passphrase, a good solution to the password problem. Perfection, yes, is very difficult and complex. But it's actually easy for us to give good advice on how to have a good solution to the password. And that maybe sometimes, well, how do you think that is? That sometimes we're striving for perfection rather than just good enough.
No, I think that's a really great point. And you articulated something that I was sort of trying to say before, but you articulated it much better than me, which was kind of starting off with just changing some behaviours, or just getting people from nothing to a bit better is much more important than trying to get them to perfect. Because trying to get them to perfect, they'll just bury their head in the sand. So yeah, I totally agree. I think it's that's a really good point. And kind of, something is better than nothing. I think often we judge users by our standards, and that isn't helpful because it makes them feel that they don't have any personal efficacy because they will never understand the subject in the same way that a professional does, and so they kind of feel a bit stupid being told to do all these things that they don't even understand, but also we'll never get them to do it. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
Okay, thank you very much, Jessica. Final round of applause.